Hey, welcome to the Upper Deck for Pinstripe Chronicles. I'm Chris. I'm here with Lynn as usual, and we've been so fortunate to have Deb Seymour back. You might recall she's an associate editor for Ball 9. She also has her own blog called The Big Apple Bite. Deb, thanks for joining us today.
I'm very happy to be here again. Thank you.
We are looking at what was kind of a strange week for the Yankees. Well, I don't know. It was sort of strange in my opinion. What do you guys think? Especially coming out of the All-Star break when playing the Astros. I found some surprises there. What do you think?
Well, I do think the Astros are a team the Yankees have traditionally had a problem with for the past 5 years. Of course, there was the issue in 2017 with the cheating and so forth, but independently of that issue, the Astros have posed a challenge for 5 years now for the Yankees, if not longer. A lot of people think the Astros have the Yankees number.
Yeah.
Some people seem to think that the Astros are still cheating, quote, whatever that means. My opinion is that there is at least some sense of defeatist attitude by the Yankees when they face the Astros. The fact that Aaron Boone needed to point out that they won 4 out of 6 in the regular season versus the Astros last year tells me that if he's keeping track, then there is definitely a psychological barrier with respect to that particular team, and we see it play out. So they have. I'm not saying they've been swept in 5 years, every single year in 5 years, but in the regular season and the postseason by the Astros. But somehow they don't seem to play with the same confidence versus the Astros that they do against most other teams in the league. And it plays out in terms of very tight games that the Yankees just can't seem to win. And it has played out in terms of games that are not close at all that the Yankees can't seem to win. And when they win, it's almost a bigger celebration than it is against other teams. Right. Is that a throwback to 2017 and the fact that the Yankees feel they were cheated out of moving on in the playoffs because of the Astros? Maybe still at this point, although as I said, it's 5 years and we're reaching the point where that should be going away. However, I do think that there is a confidence issue when it comes to playing the Astros, and that is part of what shows up every single season since 2017.
Yeah.
And maybe what's shaking them up in particular at the moment is that if this were playoff time, they would be most definitely for the American League facing the A's. Just numbers wwise, we're at 677 team percentage and they're at 663. They're 12 ahead in the West. We're 12 ahead in the East. And so, just looking at that, it is I could see why, everyone's scared at the moment. And I always say that I'm most scared. I focus on our division too much, and I always say the Blue Jays are my, biggest fear. Not right now. It's keeping an eye on Houston.
Yeah. I mean, we bat 151 versus the Astros.
Right.
That's just
embarrassing.
How do you explain that?
Well, it's embarrassing, and it's partly because Astros pitching is as good as it is, but it's partly also
there's that.
Yeah. But and that has traditionally been a strength of theirs, in addition to the hitting. But I guess my point is, a lot of the team members have actually turned over since that 2017 team. Yes,
right, because we actually had Marwin Gonzalez.
I was going to say we have both Cole and Marwin Gonzalez who were on that team, and the Astros. Yes, they still have Altuve and Bregman, who were definitely faces of the team at that point and continue to be, but so many members of that team have turned over at this point that we can't say it's because the Yankees are, have a psychological barrier against facing these same guys, because they're facing these same guys, but they're on other teams at this point, whether it's Correa or, Yuli or, some of the other players who were on the 2017 team. So right. I think that whatever the psychological barrier is, and I do think there is one, is not specifically individual to any one team member whom the Yankees have faced, in 2017 and continue to face. I think it's more the notion that they somehow can't leap over the Astros in terms of power and in terms of pitching and in terms of actually just making them feel like they're the better, like the Yankees are the better team. And when you go in with a defeatist attitude, things tend to be self-fulfilling prophecies. And we just, I watch the body language of the Yankee players when they're playing individual teams. And against some teams, they have that really confident body language. And against some teams, they don't. And their body language is worst against the Astros, just from my observation.
Well, there's also bringing Herman on to pitch to the Astros. Really? I mean, coming out of the break, that's what he decided he wanted to do.
I don't know whose decision that was. I'm not convinced it was Boone's decision to pitch Herman in that second game. I think a lot of the starting pitching and actually to a large extent the lineups are devised by the front office, and Boone gets to comment on them and make some changes, but I don't think he has total latitude in terms of who is going to be in the lineup every day and who's going to be the starting pitcher. He certainly has no latitude in terms of deciding who gets called up and who gets sent down before and after games. So the Herman decision, I'm convinced, was not a Boone decision, although others, particularly on Twitter, have disagreed with me. I do think the Herman decision may have been potentially to showcase him for a trade. And of course, if that was the case, it failed abysmally because he performed so badly.
Right.
And then the other possibility, of course, is that Boone was trying to set his rotation for what it's going to be now going forward after the All-Star break with Severino gone. And that would be the slot that Herman would go in. He would be in the slot after Montgomery. So, okay, pitch him in his slot. So if you're pitching him in his slot, that has a little bit of rationale to me. However, if the idea was to try to showcase him for a trade, coming right off an IL where he hadn't even pitched at all yet this year, that I think was a really, really bad idea.
Yeah, it was at least questionable. And, when I say Boone, I think of a corporation. I don't think of a man. I think of him as rolled in as the front office. Cashman and Boone rolled into one as a decision-making unit.
Okay.
Actually, that I know that's kind of maybe crazy, but I don't ever think of him as making decisions. I mean, he's practically inarticulate. The post-game presser, for example, that he gave was gibberish.
Well, he was very upset.
He was very upset at the question, I think.
Yes, I was going to say he rarely gets rattled by the media, but after that Houston doubleheader, he was definitely rattled, and it came through. It was quite clear in the post-game press conference. And I think that's one of the reasons that he said some of the things that he said that he wouldn't normally say.
Right.
This business, and I just mentioned it before, of, well, we took 4 of 6 against them last year, so what are you saying? The fact that he not only is keeping track, but that he felt the need to mention it showed that he was being defensive, and being defensive is because he felt attacked.
Right.
Normally when he gets attacked, he's got some kind of slick answer to cover for it. Last night, I think in the post-game presser, for example, he was asked about the Yankees stranding all these base runners, and he had his usual comeback, which is, I thought we had some really good at-bats. It's right after the break. People are just getting back into it, and I thought the at-bats were really very good. We just couldn't string them together the way we needed to, and hopefully that'll get better again. As we go along after the break, we'll string them together better and be more clutch. That's the typical Boone response to those kinds of questions. But after the Astros doubleheader, he was rattled, and it came through in the presser.
Yeah, and I think that Boone, to me, watches the fan, talks about the game like a fan, more like a fan than a manager. It's like he's enjoying the ride. Thanks a lot. That was not a bad game. We got some good hits.
Actually, we would have been far more verbal at that presser. Put anyone in Yankees Twitter in that seat would have been really ugly as fans. And game 2 there, again, the lineup was better, and Monty, I mean, relatively, Chris, right? I know it's not
relatively, yeah.
Yeah, I should say.
Yeah.
Which is easy for it to say it's better. And Monty did well.
I think Montgomery was fine.
Yeah.
In that first game in the doubleheader against the Astros, I thought he was fine.
Yeah.
I
flipped it, right. Yep.
Right. It was not a pitching problem. The Yankee bats just didn't come through.
Yeah.
But it wasn't the strandathon that we saw last night against Baltimore. It was just the bats weren't coming through. To me, that spells a different kind of issue. Now, you can say it was right after the All-Star break and, people were just still getting back into it, and it was the very first game, and there was a little bit of rust and, all of that. And perhaps that's a partial explanation, but then why didn't the Astros demonstrate same? So I think in the case of I guess if you want to compare that first loss where Montgomery pitched versus the loss last night against Baltimore, what I'm saying is those were two very different kinds of losses.
Yeah.
Right.
Because when Montgomery started against the Astros, he pitched very well, and the Yankees did not strand a lot of runners. They just did not string together hits because they weren't hitting.
Yeah.
And at the very beginning of the game, if you recall, and I understand this was a day game, not everybody got to see the entire thing, but even I had to miss the very end of it. But at the very beginning of the game, it looked like the Yankees might be about to get no hit again by the Astros. So they just were not hitting against the Astros. That's a very different kind of loss than what happened last night against Baltimore, in the case where they got plenty of hits. They just stranded the runners, which was much more like what we saw, for example, in 2021.
Yes.
And even just game one with the Orioles, I mean, saying that it was not Tyone's best outing would be such an underrepresentation.
Yeah.
He lasted 2.5 before they had to bring Licky in. So, what do you think happened there, other than the technicalities we saw with his location and such?
Well, I think Tyone is in the group of Yankee starters who are being overused this year in some sense, and this goes to an issue that has been a concern for me for several weeks already with respect to the Yankee starting pitching. At the very beginning of this season, because of the shortened spring training due to the lockout, it was predicted that a lot of starting pitching staffs and even bullpens would get hit really badly with injuries because pitchers just did not get the number of reps in spring training and the amount of time to really work out their arms and build their strength in order to be able to pitch the number of innings that would be required during the season. And early in the season, we did see an awful lot of starting staffs and even bullpens get hit badly. The example I like to use is the White Sox. Their starting pitching was decimated, and they lost 4 of their starters at one point, and their bullpen was hit simultaneously. They lost several bullpen pitchers at the same time, and this was in the first month of the season. We've even seen it cross town with the Mets. They lost starting pitching early on. Their 2 starters both suffered from injury. Their 2 main starters being DeGrom and Scherzer. DeGrom's still not back. Scherzer is back, but he did have an issue earlier in the season as well. Chris Bassett for the Mets had an issue. He's back now as well. And some of their bullpen pitchers have been affected as well. So this was predicted before the season that there probably would be a lot of pitching injuries this year, and it's borne out. We've seen it to be the case. And the Yankees were the one team who really didn't seem to be impacted. And I think what we're starting to see is a delayed impact of the injury and not effective pitching that we saw earlier with other teams. Right. Some of the teams that are really deep in the hole now in the standings across all divisions in baseball are teams whose pitching was really, really weak early in the season.
Yeah.
And, they dug holes for themselves.
Yeah.
But the pitching was really weak for the same reason that pitching has gotten injured, which is that the spring training wasn't the normal spring training, and the pitchers did not get their normal workouts and strengthening and lengthening that they normally do in spring training.
Yeah.
And the Yankees, on the other hand, and we were told this, the starting pitchers apparently got together and decided they were going to try to go deep into games and relieve the bullpen a little bit so that the bullpen would be fresher in the second half. I'm not so sure that was the wisest decision, and I'm not so sure that the Yankees should have condoned it. The Yankees being the organization,
Right.
should have condoned that decision on the part of their starters,
Yeah.
because first of all, we're seeing the impact of it now in terms of injuries, but second of all, especially to Severino. But
Yeah.
second of all, what can happen even if you don't get injured is you become less effective because
Yeah.
you become worn out, having pitched too many innings too quickly, too early. We have 3 pitchers on the starting staff who've never pitched the number of innings that they would be required to if they made the normal 30 starts this
Yeah.
season.
Yeah.
So, if you add up all the factors, probably using more of the bullpen earlier, where you have the ability to send pitchers up and down
Yeah.
to the minors, might have been a wiser decision than just letting all the starters go as deep as they could into games in the first half.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And, that brings us to the trades that may be needed as we go forward this season. Pitching is a concern, hitting is a concern. I'll start with you, Deb. Which do you think is where's the greatest need?
I think the obvious greatest need right now is pitching.
Okay.
So we're starting to see pitchers become less effective. Sorry, I'm trying to get my chair into the right position here. It's not really working.
The upper deck, we're whopper jaw.
That's better. Jockeying for position here. I do think the pitching is more necessary at this point because, first of all, Severino, we have no idea when he's going to be back. And second of all, the number of innings that are being pitched by the starters that we currently have in use is mounting, and it's taxing. So I do think there's a need for at least one more good, solid starter. And I know Castillo's name has come up a lot, and I think that would be a tremendous acquisition if the Yankees and the Reds could actually figure out a trade that worked for both sides. And then I think they probably need bullpen help at this point, certainly with the horrible, horrible King injury that was unforeseen and so sudden and so awful.
Oh, that was awful.
He was a guy in the bullpen you could count on, and he really deserved to be an all-star. It's just there wasn't a spot for him in the end, but he has been an all-star this year. So losing him, I think, represents a big hole in the Yankee bullpen, and I would not be surprised if Cashman goes after at least one more solid bullpen arm, for before the trade deadline, in addition to potentially another starter before the trade deadline. So I do think that even if Loaizaga and Chapman could become themselves again, which is doubtful in both cases, and we don't even know what a definition of themselves is at this point because they've both been so up and down over the past couple of seasons. I'm not convinced that would solve the problem. I do think that bullpen help is needed if it's at all possible to acquire it. And then, of course, in the hitting department, Joey Gallo has been pretty ineffective this year. And although 2 nights ago it was his home run that was the difference in the game and it was the reason the Yankees won, that doesn't mitigate weeks and weeks and weeks of ineffectiveness. So replacing him, in the lineup, I think is really important with somebody who's a more effective hitter and somebody who can play outfield. So, I think that is probably the third most important need right now before the trade deadline if Cashman can make those kinds of acquisitions.
I think you're right. On many of those points. Lynn, what about you?
I agree on the pitching need, both bullpen and starting. Wondering about Marinaccio, because they have more and more been, putting him in as a starter. And he could really continue to swing back and forth, I suppose. But, I wonder how his performance is going to impact if Cashman is even going to go there with our demands, how they would factor Marinaccio in, because I think he deserves more of it than he's been getting. I think he's proven himself. So that's a wondering.
Are you referring to Marinaccio or Sears? Because Marinaccio.
Well, Sears is Sears. So here's the thing about me, Deb. I often on a Sunday morning will switch my thoughts. Chris is familiar. I have to apologize every week. I was surprised, by the way, that Sears wasn't the one that was brought up the other night.
Right.
Well, he was there. He was there as the 27th man, but they put him in. I was very surprised he was not the second game starter.
Exactly.
Yes.
In the Houston doubleheader. There's no question. And my prediction was that it would be Montgomery and Sears, and the Herman thing was a complete surprise to me. And even before the game started, I thought it was a very bad idea.
Right.
As we've discussed, it was a decision that the organization made for whatever their reasons were, and it was probably a pretty bad decision.
Right. And then as far as the outfield, I think we're good. I mean, I think we would all love the power bat of Soto. But let's talk about Carpenter for a quick second.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
He's basically, you could say fairly, never played right field before. To any degree, maybe a couple of times with the Cards, but if that. And he's just another, just another guy that you tell him where to go nicely. Not the New York, I'll tell you where to go. And he does it, and he does it well. And his bat is not an aberration. It's not a one-off. He's the name in town right now. So that to say, I think Gallo could just be given away at this point, because we also have Hicks, who I'm much more confident about Matty Mustache than I am about Hicks. But
yes,
Hicks has been trending for a while now, and Hicks came back from the All-Star break, still producing. And Chris, I see your face.
Hicks gives me indigestion.
Yeah, and I understand why. It's post-traumatic stress. I know better. He's gonna split his pinky nail any day now.
I get
that. But we also have Andujar. And that's been a back and forth debate among the fans. But for now, I think we got it covered. We have Stanton, we have Judge, and I think we're good in right field for now with Carpenter. He needs
you're saying we don't need
every day. Sorry, go ahead.
No, I'm sorry. I thought you were done.
No,
so you're saying we don't need Soto?
We need Soto. We need Soto. We want Soto.
Okay.
But to make a choice in less than 2 weeks and Hal in his wallet, I'd be far angrier if he doesn't open it up for pitching.
Okay.
Double pitching gets. And paying Judge. Pay the man, Hal.
Pay the man.
And that's a lot of money for him to spend. And so if we had to give something up,
right.
Yeah, it would be Soto with sadness.
Deb, do you think we need Soto, or do we not need Soto?
I don't think we need Soto. I think he would be gravy. If he can be acquired at a reasonable price, so to speak, in terms of number of prospects, and be productive for the Yankees, more productive than he's been for the Nats this year, in which he's in a lineup where he has no protection, then sure. I mean, who would not want that? That would be an amazing icing on the cake. Do I think it's a pressing need to get Soto? No, I do not. I think the pressing needs are in the pitching department, and I also think the second most pressing need is to clear that Gallo spot and get an effective outfielder who can do some hitting in that spot, because Gallo is an extremely effective outfielder. We've talked about the fact that he was a Gold Glove outfielder for the Texas Rangers, and so it's not about his fielding capabilities, but to have somebody in there who can field and just can't really seem to hit in New York City is not useful for the Yankees, whereas acquiring a bat whom can play the outfield effectively, such as Benintendi, which has become a discussion again now, and actually has a bat that can be very effective in a good lineup, as we saw in his years with the Red Sox, where he had some protection, unlike Kansas City. And I think, acquiring that kind of bat could be very, very useful to the Yankees. I think a Soto trade would be risky. I think you're putting yourself in a situation where Judge may decide he wants to walk if Soto is acquired, no matter what price the Yankees are willing to offer him, simply because that would show that they don't consider him to be necessarily the face of the franchise and the leader of the franchise going forward and the most effective hitter and outfielder in the franchise. So, if you're not serious about signing Judge, then by all means do whatever it takes to acquire Soto, because then it doesn't matter if you're not serious about keeping Judge. It doesn't matter whether or not he walks. However, if you're serious about trying to keep Judge, then I think there's a risk involved in just how Judge feels by the end of the season. And no matter what price the Yankees offer him, if some other team can match it, he may decide to go. So I think those are some of the dilemmas the Yankees are facing at this point.
And were they to acquire Soto, saying what you said, which I agree with, Deb, they're showing their cards. They're before the postseason. And are we going to see the Judge that we're seeing with that air out of the balloon and the disappointment too? So it would be interesting on what means more to them. Because if they're not thinking of that, they should be. They should be thinking about exactly what you just said, Deb.
I've been watching, and I know you have too, the Derek Jeter documentary, The Captain. I've seen just the first episode. But one of the things that came out quite clear from Jeter was how bitter he felt after his arbitration. Yes. And I know that they didn't actually go to arbitration, but Judge will likely be weighing the same sorts of attitudes towards himself as Judge found there. As Jeter found when they were judging him. So as you say, Deb, he wants to see himself as the face of the franchise, as the all-star outfielder. That's Judge in a nutshell. That's what he's going to be wherever he lands.
Presumably, unless he lands with the Angels, where Mike Trout is the face of the franchise. But
right. God forbid let's say somebody was saying, one of you, I think, were saying even Shohei Ohtani is on the trading block. So, the Angels definitely don't need Judge.
The question, I think, about Judge is, does he have a preferred geography in which he wants to play? And because he's from the California region, people assume he would want to go back to California, presumably, let's say, to the Giants, because he's from more of that northern California, central to northern California region, and not the Southern California region. Having lived in Southern California, I can tell you that flying from Southern California up to Northern California is almost as bad as trying to fly halfway across the country. So going to Southern California would not be, Judge is from California, so he wants to go back to Southern California, and he definitely wants to land with the Angels. Let's say there were no Trout, because that's not where he's from. He's actually from a part of California that's not close to that. Yeah. And California is a huge state. However, for example, if Judge were to land even further south in San Diego, that he'd be very, very far from, quote, home.
Right.
So I don't think that holds any more appeal to him than staying with the Yankees, even if we're talking about geography. Yeah. It would probably be the Giants or the A's that he'd be most interested in if he cared about geography. However, I do think he is serious and is sincere when he says he'd like to stay a Yankee. And I also think he's just as sincere when he says, but he knows what his value is in the market. And he is having an MVP caliber year. There's always Shohei Ohtani in terms of possibility for MVP, because he's a two-way player. So will he win it every single year he's in the league simply because he's a two-way player? Right. But if you put that aside, there are only about 3-4 other players who are having MVP caliber years, and Judge is certainly one of them. So if you're the Yankees and you're going to spend your money in the offseason, do you let your MVP caliber player who came up in your organization walk? Right. Or do you make a different kind of decision, or do you make the decision to keep him no matter what it takes? Yeah. I think he's proven that pays to keep him no matter what it takes, but
Yeah.
they will not sign a 10-year contract with a 30-year-old. So
Right.
if that's what he's looking for, it's just not going to happen. You know, I think about, you know, other MVP caliber players on other teams, and the Yankee way has always been to try to bring up guys in their own organization, and those
Right.
are players who become the faces of the franchise. They become the Don Mattingleys, they become the Derek Jeters, and of course, you know, there are many players previous to Don
Right.
Mattingly who were Yankees from birth, so to speak, and, you know, well, certainly Yankees from the time that they were in the minors and became the faces
Right.
of the franchise. I have a very hard time thinking of somebody who did not come up as a Yankee
Yeah.
who became a face of the franchise. You know, if whether we're thinking about Lou Gehrig or Mickey Mantle or whoever it is,
Right.
these are all Yankees through and through, so to speak. So to let Judge walk and then acquire Soto and try to make him the face of the franchise is not part of the Yankee tradition now. It doesn't mean they wouldn't do it.
Right.
And then sign Soto to some humongous contract that's even larger than whatever it is they'd be willing to pay Judge, simply because Soto is younger. It doesn't mean that they wouldn't do it. However, it would be very out of step with what has been the Yankee tradition for the past, you know, 50 to 100 years.
That's right.
And
Exactly.
an
No.
interesting parallel, since you were talking about Ohtani a minute ago, Chris,
Yeah.
is were they to bring Ohtani over, I see the same problem with Cole and Ohtani as you were just talking about with Soto and Judge.
Yes.
Now
they
have these two aces, with
Right.
Ohtani really being, you know, the most touted nationally,
Right.
than Cole, as Soto is right now,
Mm-hmm.
even more so than Judge. So,
Well,
what do you think?
Unfortunately, we're out of time. And I want to thank both of you for coming on today and being so opinionated. That's exactly what we want and what we hope will happen every week. Don't forget to like, subscribe, comment. We would love to hear from you. Lynn, you want to take us away?
Sure. As you see, I'm sitting literally on the upper deck today. You see the breeze coming through my hair? So, you know, please join us every week. You know you have a seat with us right here on the upper deck. And please beat Baltimore.
Go Yankees.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.